This is pretty cool. I realized this is the first time I've ever been given a full hour to give a talk. So just a second, I'm just gonna kind of enjoy it and luxuriate in all this time I have. This is kind of amazing. So I can talk slow, which is generally hard for me to do. Uh, anyway, here we go. So who am I? My name is Dave Gilbert. I am a native New Yorker, currently living in Brooklyn. I'm a former 9 to 5 guy, used to work in the garment center doing shipping work, very boring. In 2006, I kind of threw all caution to the wind and decided I wanted to write games for a living because no one ever said I was smart. So I started Wadget Eye in 2006, joined by my wife Janet in 2009 and our daughter Eve in 2013. We focus on point and click adventure games, very narrative focused. We've done about 16 of them, including the Blackwell series, Puzzle Bots, Shiva, Resonance, Gemini Rue, Primordia, Golden Wake, Emerald City Confidential, Technobabylon Shardlight, and Unavowed, which we launched last year. I'm sure I left out a few there. Here again is my really pretentious talk title. This talk is about empathy, which means discussing feelings, and that is a very arcane thing, which is very, very hard to quantify. There are no hard or fast rules about feelings or how you feel about things. So this talk is mostly going to be about my own thought processes about the subject, mostly pulling from my own work and how I kind of created that connection. So 4 years ago, I started thinking about this a lot. This is when my epiphany moment about feelings in games. I was working on a game called Technobabylon with a man named James Dearden. And I'm going to be talking about a sequence from the game, but if you haven't played it, don't worry because the sequence was cut. There was a scene at the very beginning of the game. There's a scene in a set of puzzles. This is the first time you're introduced to one of your player characters. Guy in blue, his name is Charlie Regis. You enter this little park to find this teenage girl sitting on the tree who is threatening to hang herself. You talk to her for a bit, and then she hangs herself. And that kicks off a sequence where you need to save her before she dies. In theory, this had everything. It had drama, it had tension, it had high stakes. But for some reason, and I'm really sorry about this graphic, I am no artist, it fell flat. Nobody cared. The scene didn't resonate at all with any of the testers, any of the players. And as more and more testers played through this, we learned that they all felt the same way. And finally, maybe much later than I should have, I took a close look at the scene and tried to figure out just why. Like, why did no one care? Why didn't I care, if I had to be honest? And in hindsight, the answer was kind of obvious. We didn't really know either of these people. We didn't know her. We didn't know her struggle. She says something about it being a political statement, but we don't know enough about this world yet for that to have any meaning. We don't even know anything about Regis, the character we're playing yet. So we're asking the player to care and care deeply about many things on pure blind faith. We're assuming empathy where none exists. And that's why the sequence didn't work at all. And as a result, I committed my biggest act of executive meddling. I was publishing this. I was working with a developer on this. And I asked James, the writer, to remove the scene completely and replace it with something else. And I'm gonna talk more about that later. But this experience taught me a lot, and I've been thinking about it very deeply ever since. Too often, a game is focused on just telling you what is happening and rarely puts enough effort into getting you to care about what is happening. And I want to care. I've played too many games. I have been a gamer for a long time, and I've seen it all. It's very hard to get me to care. So how do you get me there? I want to take another step back and talk about a term that I made up, and I first coined it a few years ago, and it has not caught on yet, but I'm determined to keep repeating it until it does. I call this having your dinner, and it's a reference to a scene in the TV show Breaking Bad. How many of you have seen Breaking Bad? Okay, quite a lot of you, so you probably know what I'm talking about. If you've watched the show, you might know which scene having your dinner refers to. It's this one, the scene where Walter White brings Jesse Pinkman home for dinner. And this scene is great. It's funny, it's awkward as hell, and incredibly dramatic all at the same time. I'm not really alone in thinking this. Tons of articles have been written about it, all analyzing the shots and the timing and the composition and everything. But I'm not interested in any of that. What interests me most about this scene, if you're watching it out of context, you will have no idea what's going on. For those of you who have not seen the show, you're probably looking at this dialogue, and if you could look at the video later and pause it, you're probably looking at this dialogue and wondering what the big deal is, what's so funny. None of it makes any sense. But if you did watch the show, you know exactly what the big deal is and why this little animation here is so funny. And when I sit and think about this scene now, all I can think is that this took balls to write. Like, what a leap of faith this must have taken. This dinner scene only works if your audience has been invested in the story and the characters thus far. And the writer, Vince Gilligan, had the guts, the sheer chutzpah to believe that the audience cared enough about his characters to make this scene work. This scene takes place in the 6th episode of the 5th season of Breaking Bad. And that means every line, every moment, every action is seeped in 5.5 seasons worth of content and context and stuff. That's roughly 5 years, 54 episodes, and 40 hours worth of character development and plot advancement, all of which are needed to get this scene and be affected by it. That's the background behind my term, having your dinner, which I loosely define as the point at which the audience's emotional investment is assumed. If you have your dinner right on time, it can pay off beautifully. Have your dinner too early, it just falls flat. Have it too late, and it just starts feeling padded. This metaphor is a little strained. I just really like Breaking Bad. Going back to Technobabylon, we tried to have our dinner so early it was practically breakfast. There was no emotional investment here. James told me that when he originally wrote the suicide scene, he was still getting a feel for the characters and the world, and that was very obvious when you played it. There was not only a lack of connection between the player and the sequence, but there was also a lack of empathy between the writer and the sequence. And that was very palpable. The player felt no empathy there, or rather, they didn't feel any empathy at all. And that's the very interesting thing. When I asked James to cut the scene, he had already written the whole rest of the game, which means he had spent quite a few years in this world, growing very familiar with it and its characters. And it's obvious that he began to care about them and care quite deeply. The later scenes in the game show a tremendous amount of care and detail. So when I asked him to write a new scene for the beginning, he was able to approach it from a whole new mental place. And it was like night and day. This new sequence here replaced the suicide scene. It's short and simple. It again casts you as Regis, and you get a sense of him and his partner Lau almost immediately. They say a few words and just bam, you know who they are. You get a feeling for this world and what they're up against and what this game is even about within 10, 20 minutes. And James was really only able to do that because he had such a close understanding of the world he had created. And as a result, he developed a deep connection that could not be faked. And this type of thing is not unusual. How many games have you played where you heard, oh, it gets better later? Or there's a book series where you hear, oh, it gets better, the first one sucks, it gets better later. Or a TV show, it's like, oh, just get a few episodes in, it gets better later. I could think of so many examples off the top of my head. The Dark Tower series, everyone says the first one sucks. It does suck. Read it anyway, the series is great. Dresden Files, the first book is very, very tropey, but it gets so good. Legends of Tomorrow, the first season is garbage. The rest of it is a national treasure. It's so good. And that's expected. The creators and the writers are developing this deep connection to the world and the characters as they're going along. You write what you know and you write what you feel. And if you care, you have the best foundation in which to make your audience care Two, if you don't have any feeling for what you're creating, then it will have no heart and no soul. And I'm not immune to this either. This same criticism is often leveled at my own work, specifically the Blackwell series. Has anyone here played the Blackwell series? A few of you. Okay. This is a series of 5 games that I spent almost a decade of my life writing. And it was conceived even earlier than that. In 2003, I decided I wanted to make a game about a ghost. So I decided to just draw a ghost. So I summoned all my years of art study and sat down and I drew a ghost who I named Joey, because why not? Nothing really substantial came of the idea, surprise. So I kind of put him in my pocket for later use. And then later, when I decided I wanted to actually sell games for a living, I took him out again and created the Blackwell Legacy. This game starred 2 characters, Joey, the ghost, and Rosa Blackwell, a spirit medium. And the rough story is that they help lost spirits come to terms with their death and help them move on. There are 5 games in the Blackwell series: Legacy, Unbound, Convergence, Deception, and lastly, Epiphany. And creating them, as I said, took almost a decade of my life. I became very familiar, intimately familiar with these 2 characters, so much so that whenever I revisit the very first game in the series, the characters are almost unrecognizable to me. Joey is very bitter, kind of misogynistic, cruel in places, kind of an asshole. Rosa is so closed off and socially awkward in the first game that it was extremely hard to relate to her on any level at all. And also my skills as a writer and designer were a lot weaker. I got better as I went on. And when the last game rolled around, I knew I could write their dialogue in my sleep. I knew how they'd react to everything. The more you work with your characters, the more you work with your world, the more real it all feels. And that certainly was the case with me. I grew very emotionally attached to these 2, and I really cared about them. And like Vince Gilligan, and I am totally comparing myself to the creator of Breaking Bad, because I really am that pretentious. Like Vince Gilligan, I totally took it for granted at this point that the audience was invested in them as much as me. I could have my dinner. I could stop trying to give the audience feelings, and instead I could mess with them. And boy, that was really fun. All those years of emotional investment, the audience's and mine, could now pay off. As a creator, there's a tremendous sense of freedom and relief when this happens. It's the juice, that's why you do this. So because I had such a great thing going, and because I had an existing audience that was emotionally invested in my world and my characters, and because life was apparently too easy and wonderful, I naturally ended the series. There are a number of reasons why I did this. The main reason is that regardless of how much better each game was, it was still tethered to that very first game in the series that by all metrics just wasn't as good. I could no longer deny the data, which showed a severe drop-off of players between the first game and the second, and to a lesser degree the third, at which point the numbers stayed pretty even for the rest of the series. So if they stuck around past the first game, they usually played the rest. And this was very dispiriting, because it showed me that no matter how good a potential future Blackwell game was, it would be very difficult for me to reach a bigger audience. Most of the potential players, when hearing about this potential future game for the first time, would most likely play the first game, bounce off of it, and then never experience the good ones. There were other reasons why I ended it as well. I was eager to try new things, but the cold reality was that it was just time to end it. So I did, and it was very hard. A funny story. A few weeks ago, I was sitting in a cafe in Brooklyn, and a woman walked by the window, red hair, dark black coat, earmuffs, glasses, just like Rosa Blackwell, and it scared the crap out of me because I thought I was seeing my character, and it made me very sad. So I'd obviously done something very right in a way. I really created an emotional connection with these characters, and I miss them very much. I was in this position where I had to build up that empathy and investment all over again. not just for the audience, but for myself. I learned that it was very important that I care about what I'm doing and not just take pride in your work. I mean, everyone should take pride in their work, but actually liking and empathizing with the characters that I'm creating. I didn't just want, and I also didn't just want the game to get better as it went along. I didn't want to go through that again like I did with Blackwell. I wanted to hit the ground running with characters that I already empathized with. Because if I didn't care, you certainly weren't going to. So that brings us to Unavowed. A quick elevator pitch for Unavowed is that it is an urban fantasy adventure game with the narrative structure of a party-based RPG, which is a very boring and unsexy way of saying that it was going to feel like old-style BioWare, but without the combat. You progress through the game via a series of missions, and for each mission, you have a pool of characters that can join you on your adventure, and you can choose 2 of them at any given time. This gameplay mechanic will be very familiar to anyone who played games like Knights of the Old Republic, or Dragon Age, or Mass Effect, but instead of the different parties changing your tactics in combat situations, they change how you solve puzzles in the game world. I had some basic ideas for the story. I knew it was going to be another urban fantasy set in New York, write what you know. It was going to be the same universe as Blackwell, but without all of Blackwell's baggage. But I was going to throw in some small references for the longtime fans. But for all intents and purposes, it was going to be its own separate thing. So I had my setting, and I had my bare bones idea for who the characters were going to be. This is them. These 4 characters, I had Mandana, Logan Brown, Vicky Santina, and Eli Beckett. These 4 characters were going to be the ones you palled around with over the course of the game. The draw and the focus would be the relationships between them, teasing out their individual backstories and seeing them come together as a team over the course of the game. So in order to do that, I really needed to get into their heads and get to know them on a mental and emotional level. But whereas with Blackwell, that happened very organically and naturally over several years of just working with them, I didn't want to wait that long. I needed to find another way to make that happen, some kind of shortcut, cheat code to get there. So the first thing I did was commission some sketches of these 4 characters. I only had a vague understanding of who they were, and I figured these sketches would help crystallize it a little bit more. These aren't quite as detailed and expressive as this, but, you know, they did the job. And since the game was focused on the characters, I again needed a very strong understanding of who these characters were and how they related to each other. Instead of putting them into the game and figuring it out as I went along, I instead took that time and instead started just writing conversations between the characters. I would come up with hypothetical situations and then just let them hash it out. For example, Eli and Vicky are trapped on a roof and have to pass the time while they're waiting for rescue. Have them talk. Logan and Madonna are contemplating the death of a friend. Let's have them have a conversation about that. The goal being to try and find the ways these characters connect, what they have in common, what they don't have in common, what makes them laugh, what creates conflict, that kind of thing. And I noticed something very interesting when I started writing these exercises. The first place I always went to every single time was snark. I found myself just making them insult each other over and over again. And it amazed me how easy it was to just fall into that, to just have them insult each other and call that witty and clever. But it wasn't witty and clever. I thought I was being clever, but it wasn't until I looked over what I wrote that I realized I wasn't engaging with them at all. I wanted to like these 2 people, but they weren't being likable. They were being jerks to each other. So I decided to change tactics a little bit. If they're going to argue over something, that's fine. But at the end of the conversation, they needed to meet somewhere in the middle and come to some kind of mutual understanding. So like here, in the previous version of this conversation, he's tapping his staff, she's telling him to stop, he's saying, no, I'm doing it on purpose to annoy you. Jerks, you know? It was horrible. But here, I kind of extrapolated, okay, why is Eli tapping his staff? Oh, it's a control thing. And she's worried because mages tend to go insane. So she's concerned about him. Instead, it comes from a place of friendship and kindness and actual respect than just a place of snark. So that's what I was going for with a lot of these conversations. And I spent several months of pre-production writing these conversations. And I learned a lot about the characters just by having them talk to each other, and even just extrapolating the world building based on what I needed from the characters. And if you play the game, you'll see a large chunk of them that ended up in the final product. And here's one that I'm particularly proud of. Well, it doesn't seem to want to play. The gist of it is, it was just an example of what I told you. Two characters talking to each other, arguing about something, and then coming to an agreement. But if you did listen to it, you could practically smell where I almost veered into snark. But I always wanted to make it about the characters understanding and appreciating each other. And so theoretically, the more of these conversations you see over the course of the game, the more you see these characters coming together. And so by the end of the game, you will have seen all of these characters bond as a team because they all understand and get each other. And when this all clicks, when everything becomes 10 times easier, knowing your characters, knowing the world, it just becomes so easy to write them. It is a very liberating feeling. Just going, letting it flow, not thinking too much. I know my world, know my characters so well, I could just let instinct take over. This is when it's fun. Creative binges like this are why I do this in the first place. That's when it's fast and loose and fun, and until, of course, it isn't. Sometimes finding that point of connection can be very difficult. Things just aren't gelling the way they should. I find myself not caring the way I should, and I don't know why. So sometimes the best way to get through moments like that are with prototyping and testing. You can play test story and narrative just like any other game mechanic. Here is a scene from a very early build of Unavowed with using my placeholder chicken scratch here. Cheap line art, stick figure characters, placeholder dialogue, just whatever it took to get the game up and running and playable. I knew that something wasn't quite working, and I wanted to know why. Often just getting it playable would let me see potential problems early. It would often let me see the potential fun of a scene. And most importantly, I can get it tested. The main advantage of that, of course, is the most obvious one. You get the feedback early in the process. If something is really wrong, or the testers aren't having fun, or they're just really disgusted by something in the game in a bad way, then you can fix it and change that without having invested a lot of money, time, and assets. By the same token, if they really like your game and you can reach them on an emotional level and create a positive response when the game looks like this, then you can be pretty sure that you're onto something. I know that when I reach that point, I can move forward with a lot more confidence. And sometimes that's all you need. That jolt to the ego is all you need to keep motivated. If the game can be fun at this point, then it'll be even better with all the final artwork. So in this section of the game, you are on Staten Island. You and your two party members are here to investigate some mysterious goings-on. So I thought I had it all clear in my head. You're here to solve this mystery. That's the emotional connection. That's why you're there. So I threw up, a couple of placeholder art bits, cobbled together this build in a few weeks, and I hated it. I just didn't like it at all. It was boring. Something was not gelling. So I rallied the testers and asked for their opinion, and their responses matched mine, that it was boring. It was hard to care about anything. This section of the game did everything it was theoretically supposed to do. It ticked all the right boxes, but the core of it was flawed somewhere. So I had to reevaluate my goals. Where is the player's engagement? Just what is the player caring about here? Or, more importantly, what do I want the player to care about? What exactly is the reason you are on Staten Island? And not just the gameplay reason, but why do I, the developer, want you on Staten Island? And after some time back at the drawing board, I knew the answer was pretty obvious. You were here to meet this lady. Her name is Vicky Santina, this disgraced police officer that you encounter and then recruit into your secret organization called the Unavowed. So the real goal, the true goal, was to make the player like Vicky. I want you to think she's cool. I want you to like her and see what she can do. I want you to like her enough that you'll take her out on missions. So I had to reevaluate how I did everything. I gave her more screen time. Here she is attacking your group, and you have to come to some kind of mutual understanding. And here you are fighting a sea monster. I made sure every moment of the section, every character you meet, every puzzle you solve reinforced who Vicky was. So by the time it was all over, you would theoretically know Vicky very well and like her and want to take her out with you on various missions. So I put this new build in front of testers, and the response was much more enthusiastic. This version of the game worked so much better, so I moved ahead with the final artwork. At this point, I knew the work was good, and I knew people liked it, and that confidence was all I needed to move forward in the right direction. So knowing my characters is all well and good, but at the end of the day, it was still a game. Having somewhat good characters does not necessarily make them good game characters. So I made sure to approach these characters' designs from a high and low level perspective. By high level, I mean the overall feelings, the characters' personalities, their backstories, the filter that they see the world through. Mandana, for example, who we saw before, is a Jinn swordswoman who is several centuries old. She sees the world through a filter of what used to be there. She'll look at a street corner and remember a tree that she used to climb 200 years ago, or what supernatural creatures existed that do not anymore. She sees the magic in the mundane. This guy, whose name is Eli, is a mage who came into his power very late in life, and he had to leave his family and career behind. He's kind of bookish and nebbishy, and he tends to look at the world through what he's lost and what he used to be. Logan here is a spirit medium who can talk to ghosts. He is a recovering addict, and he tends to look at everything in relation to how it can help or hurt his recovery. And Vicky Santina is a disgraced police officer from a large cop family. So she typically divides the world into law-abiders and criminals. She's the most mundane of the group, or the Zeppo, if you've watched Buffy. She has no special powers except she's really good with a gun, and she swears a lot. I'm obviously paraphrasing, but these are the experiences and point of views that each of these characters brings to the various conversations and interactions they have with you, or various NPCs and each other. I wanted to make you feel like you were hanging out with friends and slowly getting to know them over the course of the game. So if high-level design means the overall feeling that I wanted you to have with each of the characters, low-level design means the steps we take. I don't know why I thought this, but I thought I had a 45-minute slot. I designed this talk to leave Q&A for 45 minutes. So I'm gonna be ending this much earlier than I expected. So please think of questions, I beg you. Low-level design means the steps we take in order to achieve those high-level feelings. By those, I mean the nitty-gritty details. What do these characters actually do from a gameplay perspective to reinforce this high-level design stuff? How do they help you solve problems and help you progress through the game? And above all, how do these small details tie into the high-level parts of their design? I knew that every mission would play out slightly differently depending on who you brought with you. And each character needed to bring something new to the table. Mandana, for example, is very agile and athletic and can climb to places that none of the other characters can, like this ledge. Her high-level statement was that she knows all of the hidden secrets in the mundane world. And this reinforces that because she can literally go to places that the average person can't. Eli can obviously burn things and has a power called fire reading, which enables him to read anything that was consumed by fire. This reinforces his high-level design because he is a researcher and a bit of a bookworm, so the fact that he uses this highly destructive power to read books is kind of the most Eli thing possible. I love it. And Vicky, being a former cop, knows every police officer in the city and is able to get information from law enforcement that you wouldn't get otherwise. And this ties into the idea that Vicky is closer to the mundane world than the rest of the group. The ability to just talk normally to other human beings is kind of beyond everybody else. So she's the one who grounds everybody. And Logan, being a spirit medium, can talk to ghosts. So if you see a ghost in any scene, he can talk to the ghost and get more information for you that way. And he often uses his experiences as a recovering addict to connect to the ghosts and help them move on. Of all the high and low level connections, I feel his is probably the weakest and the most tenuous. Didn't quite work out the way I hoped it would. Criticism of the game actually calls me out on that, so live and learn. So my intent here was for these two tiers, the high and low level, to work together in tandem to make every character combination a unique and fun and interesting experience. But at the same time, I wanted you to see the potential alternate paths that you could have taken. If you didn't bring Vicky and you see a police officer, you might think, oh, if I brought Vicky, maybe I could talk to that cop. Stuff like that. Overall, I think I did a good job with this. Not every player loved every character, but there were no characters that were universally loved or hated. And the game was very specifically designed so you can pick and choose your favorites, the ones you cared about the most, so to speak. If you see a high ledge and Madonna's not there, you might wonder if she could have gone up there and what might be up there. The hope being that you would want to replay the game and see what would happen if you took another character combination. Theoretically, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy, as they say. What I did not expect was that if the players saw a ghost and didn't have Logan with them, they got very frustrated and very annoyed. And I found this very interesting because nobody complained if they saw a high ledge and didn't have Madonna with them. They didn't care, but they really wanted to talk to that ghost. Because ghosts are inherently very interesting. You wonder who they are, what they're doing there, you want to be able to save them. So the players felt locked out of that content and got very frustrated. And as a result, they'd inevitably bring Logan with them on every single mission thereafter. So the end result was that he was the most chosen character of them all. So you're welcome, Logan. So Unavowed is a game I'm very happy with. It's the game I've always wanted to make. Just got to get this out there. Broken all records financially and critically, and that's great. It was also nominated for an IGF award, which is something I never get tired of saying. It's been out for about a year, over a year. But now I'm back in that place where I have to begin the process all over again. So will I do it the same way? I guess we'll see. Hopefully I'll get invited here again next year, and I can tell you about how that went. But until then, thank you for listening. And yeah, if you could scan that QR code that takes you to a survey, please say nice things.